You are listening to WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with a global soul. Our theme music is a clip of Summer Nights by the Eric Jones Trio. It's provided by our friend Mark Chesanout, who plays with the Eric Jones Trio every Thursday and Sunday at Good Times Jazz Bar downtown.
Hey everyone, welcome to Arts on the Air. This is Tamara Garvey, and I have the pleasure of sitting down with local writer Ariel Felton. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so excited to finally meet you. I'd seen your name around town all the time, so very glad to have you. So I will just start off reading a little bio from your website. Ariel is a writer and editor with a decade of experience in feature writing, travel writing, and copywriting. She has writing published in New York Times, Vogue, Washington Post, Bloomberg, and more. And her essay, A Letter to My Niece, which was first published in The Progressive, was listed as notable in the Best American Essays in 2020. Did I get that right? Awesome. Okay, so I saw on your website you have a BA in English from Valdosta State. So were you born in Georgia?
I was born in Middle Georgia, a tiny town named Byron that folks have usually not heard of. But then I went to VSU, yeah.
Was Valdosta kind of the closest big city to you?
Sort of, but I wouldn't even maybe call Valdosta a city.
No.
It's really not that big. I think for me, I wanted, I'd been living in the same town for 18 years and I wanted to explore, but I'm also kind of a scaredy cat and I didn't want to go too far. Yeah. So it was a straight shot down, Interstate 75, just 2 hours. And that felt like, okay, this is independent enough. But
Atlanta would be daunting.
It would be too much. Yeah.
I'm originally from Albany, so I'm familiar with Valdosta.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I missed Valdosta. I missed, Zacadoo's, that restaurant that was really close to the restaurant, fast food place.
Okay.
It was yummy though.
Your college level eating.
Yes.
Yeah. Nice. Okay, so you had your BA in English and then you came to Savannah to go to SCAD for MFA in writing. Very cool. Mm-hmm. And it looked like maybe you went straight from undergrad to grad school. Is that right?
I did. I originally had this plan that I was going to join the Peace Corps, but they don't let you join if you're anemic, by the way. Anyone's ever wondering.
They're taking care of you.
I guess so.
Yeah.
And I think my parents were a little, they were very encouraging for me to not take a break because they were worried that I wouldn't go back. So I think between those two and then not landing a newspaper job straight out of college like you're supposed to, I was like, oh yeah, maybe I'll just go ahead and get my master's. So it was literally just a few months after I graduated, I ended up moving here.
So when you were getting your undergrad in English, were you thinking you were going to go into newspaper or journalism in general?
Yeah, I was, so I got my English degree, but the focus was journalism, and I worked on the school newspaper when I was down there. I was the features editor, and that was really fun. It was a way to sort of be creative, but still talk about the news,
yes.
It wasn't I guess I did do this for a while, but it wasn't I'm going to go to the cops and ask for the police reports of the campus because I didn't really like writing about things like that. I enjoyed people stories, So then I was I found my place in features, and then decided, because at SCAD, I think the only option was just the broad writing. There was not a
At that point, it was just literally called writing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It must have been pretty early on, I guess, for them to have started that major.
I think so. I don't know the exact year, but I do remember getting here and it feeling very small.
Yeah.
I was starting at the same time as just 2 other students, and our orientation, we met at Sentient Bean and just sat down with the chair and was like, hey.
Your first class, the professor was like, okay, I guess we're here to writing class.
Yeah, it was very broad when I was there, and I guess I sort of liked it because I would have a class in business and professional writing, and then I would have a class in persuasive writing, but then I still had the room to take these sort of creative writing classes, whether it was short story, fiction, memoir, whatever that was.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be really helpful when I graduated. Because I could do a lot of little things,
yes.
So and I could pay the bills.
Those business practices as well, yeah. Mm-hmm. Was it, at that time, was it sort of was kind of creative essay writing to self-publish, blogs and things? Was it sort of a big time for that?
So I actually remember getting there and one of the teachers being like, not everyone's going to be the next David Sedaris. Okay. And I think that's where people's heads were at. They were like, I'm going to write these meaningful essays about moments and people in my life. And that's definitely, I think, where my head was at too. Yeah. I had just come from this journalism degree, and so I wanted to just like turn that lens on like personal experiences. I think as far as like the classes went, I remember having, I said those business and professional writing classes, but there was also a magazine writing class that was very helpful. We had to come up with like a very broad umbrella idea and then be able to narrow that pitch down like 50 different publications by the end of the week. So let's say you're really into trees, and that's like your umbrella idea.
Which I am.
Like, how would you pitch a story about oak trees to Cosmopolitan?
Okay.
I'm not sure that you would, but like, how would you pitch it to Savannah Morning News? Like kind of.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Changing up the angle. It was really, really hard at the time, but it's a really, really good skill to have.
Do you remember what your topic was that you had to narrow down?
I think I went all the way from like,
was it trees?
I was not trees, unfortunately. I think it had something to do with like history and travel. But I also know this was like almost like a monthly thing. So I had many.
Okay, you had to do that a lot.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Did you learn a lot about, say, if you were going to graduate and be freelance, did you learn about pitching to editors?
Yeah. I think, if I'm not mistaken, this was a long time ago, but I think one of our like final projects was to send out a certain number of pitches to publications.
Okay.
I don't think that I sold anything though at that time. So
it was hard out there.
Yeah, it was very hard.
It's really funny. I mean, both with what you're doing with journalism and then for mine was illustration, that like as time has gone on, the industry has changed so much. Like when I was graduating in the last class, we had a project where we had to create like a postcard that was your kind of calling card. It sort of had some of your art, and you had to buy a mailing list of all these different magazines, and you had to like mail this postcard out to a bunch of people to like try to pitch yourself as an illustrator. And at the time, like that was the way that you would get work as a freelance illustrator. And within probably 6 months after I graduated, you were not doing paper postcards anymore. It would be like email blasts. Like,
that was not.
It was just changing so fast.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was literally like you'd send off from a particular company and get like a pack of mailing labels. Wow. And then like send out postcards.
Wow.
It was so interesting.
And I don't even think, like when I graduated from SCAD, I don't think my mind was thinking about freelancing. It never crossed my mind that I wouldn't have a job that I had to go to from 9 to 5 in order to pay bills. So that's now that I am doing that, it's a very weird transition. Like I never thought this is possible.
I mean, I think if you didn't grow up in like a really freelancy, artsy family like that, then it just feels like too much of a leap. It's so risky. Unless your parents are like especially super amazing. Like maybe it's not even in your realm of like that's what you're gonna do.
No, my parents were both in the military, so not the freelance was not a word that we talked about.
It's like me, where it's like you start out more serious, and then as the years go on, you get just more and more.
Like I can
free.
do this. Fine.
So it looked like on your website and your resume that after you graduated, you kind of immediately you started working for SCAD. It looked like for a few years.
I started in a department called Creative Direction, so I was doing a lot of like poster headlines, email blasts. For a while, when it was hurricane season, I was the one sending the messages out to students that was like, hey, we need to evacuate. This is the plan.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. You were the emergency broadcast system.
Yes, it was very stressful, by the way.
Wow.
That's a hard job.
It's cool to graduate and then get like a full-time, like an office job in writing. Seems pretty amazing. Was that kind of rare amongst the people you graduated with? I don't know if it was 3 people by then, but
I think so. I think a lot of people left Savannah. I think that was, I don't know if it's the same now, but definitely when I graduated, the trend was like everyone was trying to get a job at like some publishing house or magazine that was in New York or some other big
Chicago
city.
Or something.
And I had also like sent out applications. I think I had interned for Professor Harrison Scott Key. He's not a professor anymore. He still works there, but in the president's office. But I interned for him as he was planning his book tour, and so I had like connections at HarperCollins, and so I was like, great. Well, that's what I want to do. But then it was SCAD that like came through, and I also was like kind of falling in love with Savannah. Like I felt like I was finally finding other writers who weren't just connected to SCAD, so I was finding that like literary community. And so I think it all worked out.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I would think at that time, like, it was way before now where people can live anywhere and, like, just, you know, work online and everything. But at that time, it's like, yeah, if you were going to be working an office job, you had to be at the city and be in the office. So that's pretty amazing to have landed a job like that here in Savannah where, you know, there's not tons of white collar.
Yeah, I felt very lucky. I always say that my SCAD professors really, like, you know, I learned a lot while I was in school, but they also, like, gave me the push I needed once I graduated. I think that several of them were references for this job. And then when I did start freelancing on the side, it was another professor who had written for Savannah Magazine before, Andrea Godo, who was like, hey, I know a student that just graduated that might pick up some work on the side.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
It sounds like you really made a lot of connections.
Yes, the connections matter.
Did you always feel like, did you always kind of sense that it was important to you in your career to, like, befriend people and really network and kind of, like, put the feelers out that you were looking for mentoring, kind of that kind of stuff?
I don't think so, honestly. I think I just got lucky there in the beginning, and it wasn't until later when I started to, like, kind of chart back, like, in my career that I was like, most jobs I knew someone there before I got, like, the job. So there was someone who, you know, was kind of, like, talking me up.
Yeah.
So it's really important, but I don't think I was thinking about it at the time.
It's amazing how many things, like, you know, niche jobs in the arts or writing or just, like, hand-holding, like, you going from one person to the next kind of thing. Yeah, it's kind of amazing. So you mentioned that you, at that point when you were graduating from SCAD, you were just starting to feel really comfortable in Savannah. What were your kind of first impressions of it when you first got here after Valdosta?
I think I was 22, which is its own mindset. I think I was really excited about things like St. Patrick's Day, like drinking in the streets, and just that things were, like, open so late. It really felt like the first quote unquote big city that I had lived in. And then the longer I lived in Savannah, I feel like I started, like, I have to give props to Deep Center. I started volunteering for them when I think I was my last year of graduate school.
And can you tell everybody, what does Deep Center do?
Oh yeah, so Deep Center is a local nonprofit that does creative writing after school workshops for young people, as well as social justice and arts change work here in Savannah. And I was one of their writing fellows my last year of graduate school, so I would go into the middle schools and kind of co-teach these workshops about metaphor and form and all of this stuff. And I don't know, it connected me with a lot of writers, and it kept me writing my own things even when I was, like, working to pay the bills.
That's really hard to do.
Yes,
a lot of people start, like, working in, like, a meta way and then just stop doing their art.
Right, they're like, well, and work is, like, tiring. Like, if you're there from 8 to 5, it's kind of hard to, like, keep that motivation up. But it was really hard to, like, tell young people to write and encourage them, and then go home and, like, be a hypocrite with myself and be like, I don't need to do that. Like, so.
And how old were the students you were working with?
So when I started, I was working just with middle schoolers. When I came back to work for Deep in 2019, it was high schoolers. Okay. So I've kind of done both ends of the spectrum.
I can imagine, I mean, either of those age ranges, they're going to kind of put you through the ringer, and if you weren't working, like, they're going to be asking you what you're doing on your own writing and your own career, so you have to have a good answer.
Absolutely, and it's just so much easier for, like, building that writing bond, especially between a writer and an editor. At the end of the semester, they are trusting us with their work to, like, revise and get it ready for publication. So I feel like if I'm able to share my work with them, it kind of helps build that trust a little bit.
So they can see that you actually can write.
Yeah. And then I'm not, like, afraid, you know, to get up in front of the class and be like, here's my story that I wrote. I think it's encouraging too.
Yeah, it's a muscle. You got to keep doing it. Where did you live in Savannah back then? Were you kind of downtownish?
So no, I was still in, I don't think anyone was calling it the Starland District.
Right.
Then,
the early days.
Right. Yeah. Actually, after I'd been living here for about maybe a year or so, I told someone where I lived. It was 39th Street. And they're like, oh, you live in the dirty 30s? I was like, well, I've never heard it called that before.
Goodness.
Thank you very much. So yeah, that's where I was. I've never made it properly downtown. Although it's gorgeous, it just, you know.
At this point, it's hard. So that would have been like 2013 to 2015 is when you were in grad school. Yeah. So you worked for SCAD for, it looked like 4.5 years or so, and then you worked at that Deep Center teaching. Do you remember, was there any kind of like noteworthy situation or incident or student that you had at Deep that really made an impact on you?
I think that's a really good question.
Because I'm sure you're teaching and you're like winging it and the kids are asking questions. I'm sure there were a lot of things that maybe like stumped you that comes up in the moment, right?
I think maybe the most, like the thing that sticks with me the most is just how much this generation is like, just up on things, you know?
Yeah.
Like, not to knock millennials or anything, but I feel like I had a very stereotypical high school experience where there was like the popular kids and the bullies and like the jocks, and we, you know, people poked fun at each other. Like, not everyone was like very nice, but what I'm noticing with high schoolers today is that like it's like not cool to be that way. Like, it's not cool to be a bully. It's not cool to not care or like stick up for other folks.
Wow.
And I think a lot of the like insecurities that I was dealing with in high school that I didn't quite have a name for, the internet has just handed them terminology for what it looks like when someone is being racist or sexist or homophobic, and I think that gives them sort of like a barrier from internalizing some of that stuff. I hope that it does. It seems like it does.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like the biggest thing that I take away from them is like they're really smart and like brave. The young people in Savannah are, they're just badass.
It sounds like, and they're really just like championing the underdog kind of thing.
Yeah. It's nice to see. And there's some really great artists and writers out there too. And they're really interested in how to be an artist here, whereas I feel like my generation again was all about like, you know, maybe you get your degree down here but then you need to go to like a city somewhere. They seem very interested in like trying to make it work in their communities, which is really dope.
I think that's interesting. I think like for a bunch of different reasons it can be like the internet where people can buy from you online and you can ship it anywhere, and then also just that like Savannah's so touristy now, so you don't just have to be in a big city to have lots of people coming through. There's people coming through here all the time.
Right. Not to mention like everyone is having these opportunities to work remotely now. Which is not something before COVID that I even thought was like, it just didn't cross my mind.
So new. Literally the last few years, people have all these opportunities. Cool. So did you, when you were getting your MFA at SCAD, was a lot of that preparing you for if you wanted to be teaching writing? Was it almost like, was that a big chunk of what the MFA was?
No, I think it was more about like getting your name out there, whether it was publishing or submitting like personal essays through Submittable to like literary magazines, or becoming an editor. That was like a very heavy focus when I was there at SCAD, like being able to look at other people's work and cull it to a place where it was ready for publication. So yeah, I think that, and then being able to do the business side so you could have like a 9-to-5 if you needed
so like writing and editing were the big focuses, but they weren't necessarily training you to go out and just immediately teach writing.
No, I don't think so. I don't remember anything at SCAD that felt super like this is how you would teach this. Although I do remember as soon as I graduated, people were like, so you're gonna go get your like PhD? I was like, I'm actually gonna take a break from school. I've been in school since I was like 5. So
was that hard to figure out then, how to teach creative writing to the kids?
A little bit, but Deep has a really good, you know, they've been doing this since 2008, so they have a really good like curriculum template for both middle schoolers and high schoolers. We have an archive of like, you know, old student work that we pull from when we need to show examples of certain things. Probably the most difficult thing to get used to is just, you know, when I started volunteering, like I hadn't been inside of a middle school since I was a middle schooler. So just remembering those dynamics and how they have a lot of energy.
I would be scared. I would be like, please don't bully me.
They're very talkative and sometimes they just don't want to sit down and you have to deal with that.
And now you're like competing with phones too. It's a whole other aspect.
Yes, they are very distracting.
Amazing. Okay, well I want to switch to, so around looking at your website, you kind of, you have all your like your degree information and then your work information, and there's a whole section where you have like links to all of your creative writing, which is amazing. And the first one that you had a link to was 2017. I didn't know if that was your first real professional freelance writing or just the first one you have on there.
Was it the one in the Bitter Southerner?
It's the Bitter Southerner, yeah.
I think that was the first story that I came up with on my own and pitched and sold. And so to me, that is very much like, instead of just getting an assignment from like Savannah Magazine, this was something that I was like, I want to write this, and someone like agreed. So it felt very much like, here we go.
Yeah,
I'm doing
like
it.
The start, doing your pitching and everything like you've been trained for.
It actually works. It's happening.
So that one was called Troublemakers Get Things Done, and it was a profile on, am I pronouncing this right? Coco Pappy? Is that her name? Okay. So, and that was, let's see, how did you end up pitching that? How did that come to you?
So I think I met Coco at a Planned Parenthood like volunteer event. And this is so long ago, so I'm not going to get her title right, but she was like basically organizing volunteers for Planned Parenthood Southeast. Okay. It was at a time where Trump was running, or he was elected at that point. Yeah. So everyone was sort of worried about the state of things, and Coco was someone who at the time I saw not just worrying, but actually like putting boots to the ground and trying to like do things about it. Yeah. So it was just a really inspiring story. And then I think for me, I framed it as this sort of the new type of Southern woman, right? Because the Bitter Southerner is all about breaking those stereotypes about the South. And I wanted to show that like women in the South were organizing and active and different than some people might expect.
And so Bitter Southern is like, it's like embracing the aspects of the South that we like, but not ignoring the things that are really problematic. Yeah. And and it looked like in Coco's story that she was from the South, and then she wanted to be a community organizer, and she moved to Brooklyn and lived in New York for years and years, and then realized that like it actually was more important for her to come back here and do it here as opposed to in New York.
Yeah, change starts at home, and like a place where you already have connections, where people already know your name. Yeah. Where folks aren't judging you about like where you're from. I think I remember in that article she talked about going up north and people like thinking she was dumb because she had a Southern accent. Yeah. And I know Coco Pappy is like wicked smart. So it was just like, I don't know, all of that was very inspiring.
I noted that down, that she, in your article, you mentioned that she was on a job interview and she's talking and the person just interrupted her and is like, I can't hire you because you just sound like an idiot.
Right. And you're like, but I know what I'm talking about. Like, how insulting.
It's really notable. I know. It's pretty incredible. Oh, so I kind of wanted to, now that I've met you, I wanted to, because that accent thing really struck me. You don't really have a Southern accent at all.
I get told that a lot.
Not have one from childhood, or did it fall away?
I think that if you heard me talk to my mom and dad, my voice would just sound a lot different. Okay. I think that it's a part of like consciously or unconsciously like having a voice, and obviously I know that we're recording, so I'm probably like slow down and enunciate. My mom put me in a lot of public speaking opportunities when I was young. She did Toastmasters, and she also made me do, what was it called? FBLA, Future Business Leaders of America, and they had a bunch of public speaking like contests for young people. Wow. So I was like kind of trained to have like a presenting voice. Yeah. But I've been like around friends, and like my dad will call and I'll talk to him for 5 minutes and they'll look at me like, what was that?
Yeah, you just slide back into it. Yeah. And I kind of, that is really interesting that you talk about your mom putting in those classes. And one of your other articles that I wanted to talk about later is just about coming to terms with how the world is going to limit you so much for being, you said 3 aspects, being Black, being a woman, being Southern. So then if your mom specifically is like, it was very important to her for you to have this very presentable kind of standard speaking voice.
My mom grew up in an even tinier town, Marvel, Arkansas, and I think from a young age, education was really, really important to her. she joined the military so they would pay for her college, you know, like that was the whole goal. And so I think she definitely wanted, you know, she was the one who was checking my report cards and like wanting to see A's and stuff, where my dad is like, B's are okay. So she was definitely like that, that parent.
Your mom was like, no, she's going to be judged.
Yeah.
On a lot of things. She has to be like, you have to be incredible. Okay. Well, this is, you know, I'm going to come to a close for the first half of our show, and then we're going to have so much more about your writing to talk about in the second half. I'm super excited. So everyone, this is Tamara Garvey, and I'm with writer Ariel Felton, and we'll have some station announcements, and then we will be back.
You are listening to WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with a global soul.
Trees are one of Chatham County's most treasured natural resources. Beyond their beauty and cultural significance, the impact of trees are far-reaching and compounding, spanning from economic benefits to health improvements to climate change resilience. Trees are woven into every aspect of our lives. Savannah Tree Foundation protects and grows Chatham County's urban forest through tree planting, community engagement, and advocacy. More information is available at savannahtree.org. This portion of WRUU's programming is brought to you by listeners and by Brighter Day Natural Foods. Brighter Day Natural Foods has been serving Savannah's healthy food and supplement needs since 1978. It is located at the corner of Bull Street and Park Avenue. They have online ordering and curbside delivery available, and now a walk-up window for smoothies, juices, and sandwiches from the deli. They are open from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Saturday, and 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. on Sunday. More information can be found at brighterdayfoods.com.
What does it mean when we say that WRUU is a community radio station? It doesn't just mean that we invite the community to create programming. And it doesn't just mean that we're a voice for the community. It also means that we're counting on the community to keep us going. And you are the community. Almost all of our modest budget comes from small annual or monthly donations from listeners like you. You get to enjoy our community-focused programming because many others have stepped forward to do their part. Now do your part by joining our community of listener donors. Go to WRUU.org right now and make a one-time or monthly donation. And thank you for supporting Savannah's community radio station, 107.5 FM.
How long have you been listening to WRUU? If you're a longtime listener and haven't yet supported us with a financial gift, now is your time to give your support. We won't ask you any questions. Our forgiveness is unlimited. Whether you've been listening for a few days or a few years, please donate, and thank you for your support of WRUU 107.5 FM.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Arts on the Air. This is Tamara Garvey, and I'm with local writer Ariel Felton. Welcome back, Ariel.
Hello, yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. So when we went into the break, we were getting into your vast, amazing, impressive freelance essay career. I think we had talked about your first essay, which was Bitter Southerner, and then it looked like the next one that you did was a profile on Trelawney Michelle Duncan. Did I pronounce that right? Mm-hmm. A local author. Can you kind of describe a little bit what that essay was about?
Absolutely. So I knew her from SCAD. I think she actually graduated like a year ahead of me. And we became friends, and I knew that she'd been working on a book that was sort of like, what's the word I want to use? Like archival histories, sort of like these oral histories where she was interviewing elders in Savannah and getting to know their stories from the early like 1900s in Savannah, which I think is very, very interesting. And I want to say that was about the time that like the first iteration came out, and she has since written more about the histories of Savannah. But it was just really cool to get to talk to someone who had so much knowledge of what Savannah used to be. Yeah. And I honestly think reading her book and talking to her probably started my like intense fascination with history in general and the way things change and like how we present history now. Yeah. I was trying to find a story idea just the other day, and I went back and I picked up her book Crack Teak because I was trying to find if any of them had mentioned a Lincoln Park, which used to be somewhere around here. I'm unclear, but it was like a blacks only park for like recreation, you know, cookouts, like that sort of thing. And so I was trying to like remember if any of them had mentioned that, and I think you know, it's gone now after segregation. I think I wish I could remember exactly where it was, so I could picture like what it is now, you know.
Yeah, it's so interesting.
But I don't know.
Well, if you find it later, you can put that in the liner notes of the show.
I will.
Yeah, so that must have been so interesting for you to be interviewing somebody. You said she graduated a year ahead of you at SCAD.
Mm-hmm.
You wanted to interview her, and then you pitched that to the magazine.
Yes, I think what happened was I had been writing a lot of assignments for Savannah magazine that were about weddings, like recaps basically.
Okay.
And so this is probably the first piece that I pitched to them. That was my own idea.
That's quite a departure.
Yes. And I was, you know, it was one of those things where like I was happy to have the work. I was happy to be like stacking my bylines. If you'd have looked at my website back then, it would have been just like wedding things.
Oh my gosh.
And I was happy to be getting the experience, but I was like, all right, I want to do something that like I'm really passionate about.
Yeah.
And so from knowing her and knowing her work, I was just like, this is like super interesting.
Yeah.
And it's framed around Savannah. So I think I may have pitched it somewhere bigger first and gotten turned down. I can't recall.
Interesting.
But I was happy that Savannah magazine.
They really went for it.
Yeah.
That's really cool. You were able to uplift another local black female writer. Yeah. Also, I was struck by it both in that article and then the one before it on Coco Pappy, that both of them are just like so articulate, so intelligent. So all the pull quotes you have from them are incredible. It must be like nice as a writer where the person you're interviewing is so easy to write about.
Oh my gosh.
Like all the things all the quotes you had from them were also amazingly written. Yeah.
I think like interviewing people who are used to speaking, interviewing other writers makes it really easy. I've had some not easy interviews before where people are like, and you know, I know not to ask a yes or no question, but still sometimes people can give you really short, like, and you're like, oh, it's like pulling teeth to get stuff out of people. But no, I remember they're both great, and a good interview subject is like a godsend.
And their quotes were beautiful. I was like, their quotes were a work of art as well. And then next it looked like was your award-winning essay that was published in The Progressive, and then it was listed as notable in the Best American Essays of 2020. And this is an article about your niece and your kind of coming of age. What was that one? That was A Letter to My Niece. Yeah.
That was the first like really personal thing that I had ever published, and I've got to say that essay went through like 1,000 revisions before it found like even its letter format. I wrote it after reading James Baldwin's letter to my nephew, and it's James Baldwin. It's a beautiful piece about like being a black man in America during that time, and like he's giving advice to his nephew. And so I think I did it at first it's just as like an exercise, like a writing exercise. Like, would this be anything if I were to write to my niece about being a black woman in America today? And I think I finished it before even thinking about pitching it anywhere. And then I think I was doing research on his essay and realized that before it was in a book, it had been published in The Progressive.
Okay.
And so it was really like the universe just kind of aligning and me being like, I wonder if they would they're still around. I wonder if they would publish my redone thing. And not only did they publish it, but it ended up being the cover, which was just, at that point in my career, I'd never had anything like that. Yeah. So I was really excited, at the same time really nervous because I was being very vulnerable in this letter.
And a lot of people were going to see it.
Yes. And, my family is in it. And so that was also like a whole nother like hurdle where I had to send it to them and have them read it and be like, hey, here's the thing. Is this okay? But yeah, it's still probably one of, I don't know if it's my favorite, but it's one of my favorite things I've written.
When you said that it went through a lot of iterations, do you mean when you personally wrote it before you pitched it to them, or did the Progressive have a lot of things they wanted you to look at?
Both sides, actually. I think it probably changed more before I was ready to show it to anybody. But then when I pitched it to the Progressive, it didn't have any of the timeliness, news aspects that are in it now. It didn't mention anything about recent police brutality. It was literally just me talking to my niece in a very like personal type of way. And because they're a magazine that's all about like, you know, progressive politics and that sort of thing, in order to make it a cover, I think they needed just a little bit of a news peg,
like a hook.
Thankfully it wasn't too hard, I don't think, to sort of like put that in there, but that was the main change that they wanted, that and making sure I had permission from my family.
So that's very interesting. And you referenced David Sedaris earlier, and I mean this feels very much like him.
Oh,
he's he's writing, his family is in it, and it's people aren't always like, you're kind of coming to terms with your childhood, and every child that grows up in a family has a different has a different childhood, and everybody experiences their parents differently. And so how did that go, you showing the story to them?
So because my family's awesome, I think when I first showed it to them and told them that I had this opportunity, they were really just like excited for me. And so they gave me their blessing very quickly. I sent it to my mom, my dad, my sister, and my niece. And I think, it was like the next day when they were all like, we love it. That's so great.
Wow.
I think afterwards, now that it's been out for a while, my sister and my mom specifically have said things like, is that really how that happened? Or things about worrying about having our family business out there. It was after the fact, so that that kind of sucks, it was already out there. But I think I'm also just learning a lot about when you write memoir, like you said, everyone sort of has a different lens on the same memories. They feel different as a little sister than they do as a big sister or as the mom in the situation. And I really hope that when they read it, they understand that the point is not to like put our family errors or mistakes out in the streets. It's like, this is not an error, it's like things happen and we made the choices that we made, and now I have a beautiful niece, and now I have a beautiful great nephew, and it's not, these events don't define us, basically. It's the truth that I was trying to get at in the essay, and so I hope that with some time that is where they arrive as well.
So how old was your niece when you wrote it?
Oh gosh, that was like 2019. So she would have been like 19. 19 or 20.
So so you're writing to your niece and you're like remembering her as a baby and all of the hopes that you had for her at that time, and thinking about her childhood growing up and what she'd gone through, and then you use it as like a way to then look back into your own childhood and you comparing you and your sister, and just as you progress through childhood, what the racism and the sexism that you experienced growing up, and the othering, and just you looking at like how the world is going to put you in a certain box, and the way that I guess Black families have to raise their kids, talking to them about things, and like that the families are doing the best they can, and the system is really messed up, and so everybody has a different way of like assuring their children through childhood to learn about that.
Exactly. And I think when I was writing it, I was really coming to terms with the ways I had like internalized certain like narratives, and like learning how much that is a cycle and like can be an unconscious one, right? Like you feel as if you're just doing the right things. You're just like reaching for good grades, or behaving in a certain way, or stacking up these accomplishments because you want to be like really successful. But then you have to look back and think, are these goals mine? Are these standards mine? Or are these given to me by a world who said I couldn't do things? So it was really like emotional to write, but still like something that I'm proud of.
It was very it's fascinating, just in the way that like I guess you and your sister growing up had been so opposite, and so the way that you use this as a literary reference it was just like really amazing storytelling.
Thank you.
It's like the two of you looking at how racist and sexist the country is and how you were going to be treated, and just using that and like becoming very different, like reacting very differently. Fascinating. It's got like the ending, I'm trying to remember, it was like you kind of coming to terms with the way that your family had done their best, and they were just trying to usher you through this really unfair situation.
And it's all like still like a learning curve, right? I don't think you ever Well, I don't know. I'm only 33. Who knows? Maybe there'll be some point where I'm like, I have regurgitated all of the things that like society put inside me, but it's still, I think it's a process, you know.
Well, like you said, like the new generation they seem like they are pretty woke
Mm-hmm.
and like really championing people and not being bullying. So
Yeah.
maybe things will start changing in quicker chunks.
Yeah, maybe it's happening right now.
Yeah.
I hope so. I really hope so.
Well, it was a really fascinating essay. I think that's awesome that you got so much accolades for it.
Thank you. Thanks.
So you have a Twitter account. Is that like, for writers, is that the social media of choice? Is that the most useful one, you think?
I really, really love Twitter. I follow publications that I, think about pitching to. I follow their editors, and it's like a news feed of pitch calls all the time.
Okay.
And their emails are right there. Like I remember this sort of like assumption that it would be really hard to reach editors, and I guess sometimes it was. But if you get on Twitter, like people are just asking like, hey, I need to publish, 3 things under this umbrella. Here's my email address. And it makes it a lot easier.
Interesting. I love that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it looked like you're kind of cultivating your like, not your brand, but you as a person and the things that you care about and with your retweets and everything, where it gives a really complete view of who you are and what you might want to write about.
Exactly. I feel like in the beginning of my career, I could get a lot of assignments that like I wouldn't necessarily like pitch myself, it's not something I was interested in, but the more I am writing things that I'm interested in, the more the work that comes to me also like kind of falls in that line.
That's very cool, where they know you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're like, oh, you wrote something about the environment in the South here. What about something similar? So that's really cool.
Did that progressive article and then getting that notation, that award, did that like have a real bump in for you work-wise?
I think honestly that was 2019.
Yeah, like, so you won the award in 2020 was when it was listed in.
I think that what was really getting me more work at the time was starting to do more travel writing. So one thing that's not on my website was also happening around this time, I wrote some little travel blurbs for Atlas Obscura.
Oh, I've seen that.
And
can you describe that?
Oh, yeah.
It's very quirky, yeah.
So Atlas Obscura is like a travel website, but instead of like the things you're going to find in the like travel brochure when you get to Savannah or wherever you're going, it's like these off the beaten path sort of quirky things about the city. So like I wrote a whole entry on like the stone stairs of death and like what that was about.
Yes.
About the hidden like architecture around downtown, like the drain pipes that like end as like fish mouths, like little things like that.
I've looked at the listings for that in Savannah. There's another one in Bonaventure Cemetery. There's like a really ghoulish looking figure that's like a woman jogging. Do you know this one? Her face,
I don't know if I know that one.
Her face is very creepy. You gotta check it out.
So that was something that I wrote that I honestly like. That job came to me. It was not something that I like pitched.
Oh, cool.
And I did it because at the time it was like the most money I had ever been paid to write something.
I would not have known that website had tons of money. That's
and I think it was because it was so many locations, right? Like I did like 20 something entries, and I was like updating old ones as well as adding new ones. And so I think that was where I learned that editors really like talk to one another, because even though that was not something that I pitched or like an idea that came from me, it got me connections to places that I maybe had been pitching, but I had been ignored.
Interesting.
There. So like the editor at Atlas Obscura would say, she was easy to work with. She turned her stuff in time. The writing was good, whatever.
Yeah.
And then very shortly after that, I got my first Washington Post travel job. And so that was sort of, like I said, the first time I learned that, like, oh, editors are, like, kind of talking to each other.
Like, you really, because it was all travel, it was in the same vein, so that was why. So for the Atlas Obscura ones, did you have to go to different cities and find weird places to write about?
No, it was all about Savannah. So because I was here, it was really, really easy. And then the Washington Post piece that came after it was also about Savannah.
Okay.
But in a different, they didn't want the, like, very quirky places. They wanted the, like, locals view of, like, if your friends came for the weekend, where would you take them?
Okay.
And so doing those like back to back, I think, when your name is in the Washington Post, people like start to see it, and
Yeah.
It made pitching a lot easier going
very
forward.
cool.
Yeah.
What do you do? So when you're pitching, just like as a note for future writers of America, when you pitch, so is this then like in your intro email to an editor, would you maybe like reference, and my recent article in the Washington Post, like do you just put it front and center and say that?
Yeah. So my like formula is to always like start with the story, but always in my email there will be a blurb that's like, this is who I am. Here are other links or to work that I've written that are similar to this. I think after I'd done that sort of Washington Post travel guide story, I pitched a story that was also travel, but it was less iterative. Instead of being like, go eat here and go drink here, it was about a travel trend. I remember I linked in the very first sentence, I linked that the Washington Post had written about it before, but had not gone like as deep as I was gonna go. And I think things like that are really helpful when I pitch as well. If I can say, you sort of covered this, but my angle's a little different.
Yeah.
The more I can do the editor's job for them, the better. You know, if I say, here's my story idea, and this will work really well in your travel section, or really well on this page of your publication, I feel like it's, you know, more likely that it'll get accepted.
Yeah, and it proves that you're really paying attention to their publication and you really care about it and read it yourself.
Yeah. The one that I pitched where I was able to link another Washington Post story in it was about Black tour guides specifically.
Oh, okay.
And if they had gotten any sort of pushback when they're telling, you know, certain histories.
Yeah.
Because like it had been a viral moment on Twitter that some plantation museum had like, someone had said, I don't want to come here and learn about like slavery, and it's like, it's a plantation.
It's a drag, right?
Like,
Learning
what do
about
you
that.
mean?
Yeah.
And I was like, the Washington Post had written about it, but really they had just culled a bunch of bad reviews and been like, this is the thing that happened at this place. And
like maybe they didn't speak to the actual tour guide?
Yeah. And I was like, well, I live in Savannah. I could name 5 Black tour guides right now, and their voice doesn't seem to be in this piece. So that was kind of how I pitched that angle.
It sounds like there was an interesting era, like a lot was happening. Yeah.
I'm always happy to move away from guides of like, eat here, go here, and the more I can cover like a trend in the travel industry, I'm probably more interested in that.
Yeah, it's very sociological. It's like a real snapshot in time. Another article I kind of wanted to ask you about, it looks like you've done some writing for McSweeney's, which I love, which I don't know if people are familiar with it, but it's just got a particular tone that's just very, very satirical and hilarious. And always just like the ending line of every essay just seems, it's like a real punch. It like just really kicks you. And I loved the title of one of your McSweeney's essays was Ways to Secretly Pass Another Woman a Tampon Without Alarming Nearby Menfolk, which is amazing.
That was really fun to write. That was the first McSweeney's piece, I believe. And I'd been like trying out this humor writing. I'd written for Reductress before, which is like a satirical like women's magazine. And so it was like in that listicle format where it was really just like one-liners, you know, like just back-to-back jokes.
It's like being a comedy writer, honestly.
Yeah, I took a humor writing class at SCAD that I believe was just like an elective. It filled an elective slot. And so I've always been really interested in that like voice and how to use it to get my point across. I think I came to SCAD really like, I'm gonna write these poetic, deeply felt like memoirs, which is a lane and is very important. But I think that humor writing class and some of the work I've done for Reductress and McSweeney's has been inspiring me to see if I can merge those two voices a little bit. Like there's nothing to say that an essay can't be both funny and deep.
Yes, you know? I mean, it really gets your point across in a really biting way. And I guess it's probably mostly women who read Reductress, but McSweeney's is kind of everybody. It's getting your point across to the people maybe you want to read it. Yeah, because that was kind of cool, this satire, and you kind of touch on like all these stereotypes about, you know, men and women. You talk about sports and sad salads and consoling a crying woman. And then the last line, which I always think it's always like such a shock, is something like, menfolk can't stand any mention of women's reproductive rights. And it really just like ends in this big pow.
Yeah, I think like I love a listicle. I love humor writing, but I feel like my favorite humor has like a point behind it. So like you said, making fun of the ways in which women have been taught to like hide completely natural things about ourselves.
Yeah.
And I've been that woman too, you know, trying to pass someone a tampon and not sure how they feel about it. So I'm like, should I be secretive about it? And now I'm just like, just put it in my hand. It's fine.
I know. And this whole aspect of like having to treat men like they're like frightened baby deer or something.
Right. It's not a used one that we're passing out in the office. It's like, calm down.
I once had a moment, I was living in New York for a long time, and I had a moment where I was sitting on the subway and it was like this almost empty train, and I was just facing another girl on the like bench opposite me, and there was just like a wrapped like brand new tampon that was just rolling around on the ground of the subway train, and like the train was moving and the tampon was just like rolling back and forth, and we both were just watching it, and we just were like laughing, and we were looking at each other, we were laughing, and we were just like, look at this crazy tampon rolling around.
If a man had been on the train, you would have
been
having a heart
he
attack.
wouldn't have been having, but yeah, it was just really funny. I'll never forget it.
Yeah, I don't know anything about that. I've never been to New York still. I want to go. I want to see it. It sounds dope. One day.
It'd be funny. I know that like New York and DC are always just like writing, you know, articles about, like, it's like every article is the same. It's just like, oh my God, Savannah doesn't suck. Look at these things to do in Savannah. But it'd be maybe funny if like Savannah sent you to New York to write.
That would be funny.
And you come back here and you write an essay being like, hey guys, look at all this fun stuff to do in
like,
New York.
It's so cool here. Have you heard about this little neighborhood? It's called Brooklyn. I don't know if you've heard of it.
That would be really cute, actually. Maybe that could be like a satirical writing.
Oh, maybe I should.
Yeah.
I can go up there and like taste the grits or the biscuits and be like, well, there's nothing good to eat here. So.
No.
Although I feel like New Yorkers would riot. Like,
yeah,
they would not get the
Or
joke.
if you went there and you ate pizza and you were like, it's not very good. I prefer, I like Vinny's.
Yeah, I really like Vinny Van Gogh, guys.
Okay. Let's see. You have you had an essay in the New Yorker. It looks like your first essay in the New Yorker was 2020. Mm-hmm. Very exciting. How did that come about?
Yeah,
everyone is like a stepping stone. It's
extremely
getting bigger.
Exciting. So I like to tell this story by saying that I was pitching to this editor for a year.
Wow.
Before she accepted anything.
Would she reply to your emails, or were you just sending them into a void?
No, she would reply. So she actually, I think there was another McSweeney's piece about something. Maybe it was the tampon piece, or maybe it was something afterwards. I don't remember. But she reached out and she was like, I remember her email said, hey, have you ever thought about writing for the New Yorker? And I was like, yeah, of course I have. She's like, I'd be willing to read your stuff. And I pitched her, you know, terrible things. I'm glad she didn't accept, because now I'm like, they weren't any good.
Bad essay.
But this moment was really, it sounds like trite to say this, but it was really something I wrote in like 15 minutes. It's a true story about someone posting a lot of pictures of black and white babies holding hands on my Facebook wall in response to like me trying to have a conversation about black people taking care of themselves in this summer of like racial upheaval. I think the post said something like, ask yourself if the white friends in your circle are part of the problem or part of the solution. And this person that I know that I'd never quite liked, but I'd never had, you know, the guts to just like say this to her, sort of entered into this conversation and said just a bunch of wacky stuff. And so I wrote a quick like, oh my gosh, like, thank you so much. You've totally explained racism. It was very like sarcastic.
The tone is really good.
And I wrote it really quickly, and I think I sent it without even like giving it another like thought.
You're just like, it's perfect.
Not even that. I would not say that I thought that. I think I thought like, this just feels really true. Like, this is exactly like, and it felt, I think what concerned me the most after I knew it was going to be published is that people would read it and they'd be like, oh my God, this girl's so mean. Like, why would you talk about someone in this like really sarcastic tone? But when I wrote it, I was really like honestly making fun of myself in some ways, because I am so like non-confrontational that like, even if someone like deserves, you know, to be cussed out or to be told about themselves or whatever. Like, I'm just
Yeah.
not going to do it. And so to me, the piece was about, Ariel, how did you get so far in this relationship with this person that they don't know that they can't talk to you
Right,
like this?
You're being very self-deprecating, and it's like you have zero boundaries at all.
Right,
kind of, yeah.
right. And it's so the piece is written in this tone where it's like, oh, thank you. Because if this had have happened in person somehow, I think that would have been my face. I would have been like, wow, great. I'm gonna, step back and Homer Simpson into the bush meme.
Yeah. And then you go home and you're like, I'm in agony.
Right. And you're like, I'm talking to my cats about what I should have said. And they're like, we don't know what you're talking about. So that's kind of how the piece came around. And I do remember getting some responses to that were like, why don't you just have an honest conversation with her? It's like, well,
I mean, the people who didn't get that one and the tone of it are just, they weren't going to get anything. Because it was written in the summer of 2020, which was when, so there were all this, it was like the peak, just all these black people being shot by the police, and there's a lot of other people, and like, obviously there was a lot being written about all of that, and yours is like, it just, if people didn't get it, then they were really not paying attention.
And I think that was a summer where like probably a lot of awkward conversations like that were happening everywhere. People wanted to talk about it but weren't sure the right way to approach it, and like it could have been well intentioned, but it still lands in this like awkward type of way.
Well, some people have no sense of irony or whatever. Right? When I was just now like looking back over your work to prepare for this interview, and I clicked on that and I read it, and I was like, oh, I've read this, and I hadn't read it from like knowing you locally, and I had just read it because it's just so huge and it had been floating around and it had come across my timeline, and I remember being like rereading and being like, oh my god, I remember this. This is brilliant. Yeah.
Thank you.
So very exciting to meet you.
Yeah, well, thanks
really
so
cool
much.
Essay, so.
Just know that I was very, I was like having a panic attack when it was published. I was like excited but also scared.
Yeah, I mean, the number of people who are going to read it through their social media, and I'm sure, I mean, you have no control over it. The comments go crazy, and I'm sure when you're writing about racial and gender issues, then you're going to get a lot of hate.
Yeah, and it's weird because it happens, like I said earlier, it didn't really happen on that super personal piece, but it does happen on a lot of like journalism. The piece I mentioned earlier about where I interviewed Black tour guides, I think the headline for that piece ended up being, for Black tour guides, history is personal. Yeah. And I can't tell you how many comments I got from real people or bots, I don't know, that was like, why? Was it because they were slaves? And it's like, what? That's so intelligent. I'm so glad you added to the conversation in that way.
It's
like
absurd.
Yeah. So it happens. I think I'm better at like just publishing something and then like just leaving it and not going back to see what Twitter had to say about it.
That seems wise. That seems like self-care.
Yeah, it is. It really is.
Okay, well, Ariel, I have so many other things I would have loved to talk to you about, so I'll have to interview you again in the future.
I love it. Let's do it.
I will just end by asking if there's anything you want to leave us with, like directions you're going in for the future, or...
I would say, so I'm in a really exciting time in my life where I am just writing for the first time ever. We talked earlier about me working at Deep Center. I left that job to focus solely on writing. So I have a little branded content, which for any writers out there, branded content is like the cheat code. The secret is that it's very easy, but that it pays to pay the bills, you know? So I'm doing that for like 20 hours a week while also just working on my own manuscripts. I really love to write a book. I feel like I've been talking about writing a book since I was like, since I got to SCAD probably, and I just haven't had the space and time to like really focus on it. So that's sort of what I'm doing right now. A lot of writing, a lot of like building up my writing habits.
Your daily practice.
I write a lot in the mornings, and because this job is only 20 hours a week, I can now return to it in the afternoons, which is really nice. So I don't know exactly what the book is yet, but I feel more focused on it, so that feels exciting.
I'm so excited about this.
Thank you. Wish me luck. Wish me all the great
all
words
the best luck,
and all of the things.
Well, Ariel, thank you so much. It's been really a pleasure, and I'm so excited for all the success you've had and that you've had the opportunity to write about both frothy things and also very important, timely issues. I think it's great. I'm really glad you've had these huge platforms.
Well, thanks for having me. Like I said, I love talking about writing. I could talk about it for another hour and a half if you had the time. So thanks. I'm honored to be on the air.
You are listening to WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with a global soul.
Next up on WRUU, That Old Savannah Magic from 4 to 6 p.m. It's a variety show featuring Savannah history, radio theater, interviews, and music.